Hello and welcome to the first Slushpile Standouts video by darlingaxe.com. My name's David.
And I'm Carmen.
And we are both fiction editors for Darling Axe Editing. So first things first, I'd like to really thank everybody who contributed to this. So thank you for all the submissions.
We're going to be looking at a series of manuscript first pages, and we're looking at them as though we're screening them for a writing contest.
Yeah, and if we're in love by the end of the first page, the submission makes the long list. But if we snag partway through, it doesn't make the cut, unfortunately. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you ready to jump into the first submission?
I think so.
Okay, let's do this.
The shutter door slid open, and the silhouette of a thin woman with an elaborate hairstyle strolled along the floor. The shadow trailed behind the figure until it aligned with the patron. She stood so statuesque, ever the gracious and noble lady. My head bowed at her gaze. I was an insect that occupied her lavish gardens. I was a tool that failed to live up to its price.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
Sorry, stopping this one a bit early. A couple things in that opening paragraph. First of all, the elaborate hairstyle. So there's a woman walking and her shadow is cast across the floor, and you can tell by the shadow that there's an elaborate hairstyle. It's just a complicated image that I can't, it's a complicated kind of non-specific image. So in particular, like I would want to know what about the hairstyle is elaborate.
Yeah.
It's
Are there bits sticking out everywhere, or like give us a real image? Yeah,
it's just a little bit hard to visualize that, and that's your opening, right? And then the other thing is there's some stark telling here as opposed to showing. So ever the gracious and noble lady. It's kind of voicey in a sense, this person, but at the same time it's immediately falling as telling to me. My head bowed at her gaze. I was an insect that occupied her lavish gardens. I was a tool that failed to live up to its price. There's a voiciness there that's good, but at the same time, I want to come to those conclusions on my own. I don't want to be told that. If you meet someone, you observe them, you see what they do, how they represent themselves, you get to know them. But if somebody just tells you about someone and who they are and what they're like,
that they're a tool that failed to live up to their price, just take your time to tell us that, or show us how they feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to say that I did appreciate part of that first image there when the shadow and the figure are aligning. I think that could have been pretty cool if I had more of a specific image of the hair. But yeah.
All right.
So thanks for submitting.
All right, thanks for that one. All right. Murray's throat tightened so abruptly he had to sit up in bed to catch his breath. The air was somehow rising and rising, out of reach. The bedroom walls closed in. Inches from his face, they pressed inward and squeezed his ribs. He wheezed. His fingers crabbed over the wad of blanket and quilt and sheet. His brain pedaled faster, too fast, downhill, out of control, chasing a thought he couldn't bring into focus. With one hand finally freed, he palmed his heart, a little fast but no racing thumps. Maybe not a heart attack. Maybe only one of those little mini-strokes. Dear God, how had his sweet Hazel managed to live through this? In the dark, fighting panic, his mind churned. He was afraid to turn on the lights, afraid whatever he'd been trying so hard to remember would disappear altogether. Whatever memory he chased was so clouded over he couldn't even see the suggestion of it amid the tangled fuzz of his mind. Go back, he ordered, back to the last clear thought. It had to come clear. If it didn't, the ambulance would be zipping him down I-64, whizzing him into Paradise Shores nursing home's manicured entrance circle, and depositing him in a rollaway cot next to Hazel. Like a swimmer preparing to dive, he shoved the covers off and counted slowly. In and out, he breathed. Relax. Relax. The cooler air silted around his limbs, up his neck, into his cerebellum. He closed his eyes and continued to count. Please, God, let this not be a stroke. Aha! There it was. The edge of the lost memory snagged and began to crystallize. Ever so slowly, the memory expanded, an iceberg in the mist. He could see it now, actually quite logical. Before the panic, he'd been reliving his 87th birthday party from earlier that evening, smiling in the dark, replete with chocolate cake and buttercream frosting. He'd been dozing, perfectly content in his favorite red flannel pajamas to replay the highlights. A nearly perfect evening.
So we got all the way through that one. And I think there were some really beautiful images, and the language is really nice. Specifically, the fingers crabbing.
His fingers crabbed over the wad of blanket and quilt and sheet.
That was so beautiful. But I think it comes down to, I'm not sure if I would keep going. Like, I might go a little bit longer, but the character is confused, and it's his POV. And so I'm confused too, and it's hard to get pulled in on the first page when it's all confusion.
It's when the character's disoriented, then the reader's necessarily disoriented.
Yeah, which is, like, you can do that. It's just maybe not the best choice for the first page there. Or give us something more to care about. Like, help me care about Murray first, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I really liked it. Again, I like that sentence that you pointed out, as well as with one hand finally freed, he palmed his heart. There's a lot of beautiful stuff going on here, and I think I would keep reading, but I'm not sure how this would necessarily stack up against another submission. I could see, if I had to choose between two, I might find some of that disorientation enough to pass on this one. But it is very good,
and clearly really good writer.
Yeah. Okay, anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Thank you for that one.
Thanks.
All right. I didn't fully grasp that my future was far more likely to feature a prison jumpsuit than a cap and gown until one of the tellers saw our guns and began screaming like a squirrel gripped in a hawk's talons. Up to then, I had convinced myself it was all play acting and that no one would really be hurt. After all, the guns weren't loaded and we were only stealing from a bank, not from real people. Plus, I wanted to be a good friend to Abigail by helping her earn Paul's praise and affection, even if I did have my doubts. And of course, there was that little matter of blackmail. But listening to the terror in that young woman's screams, I had to admit this was a lot more than anti-war guerrilla theater. This was a federal crime.
All right, I think I'm going to stop.
Okay.
I would say that there's an interesting voice here.
Okay. What are you snagging on?
Just a lot of telling in the first paragraph. It's a bit too much right away. Because it's so in the character's head. I would rather see a lot of this played out. It's an action-filled scene, and yet we're spending so much time in this character's head. There are guns, they're in a bank, but they're stopping to think about Abigail and being a good friend to Abigail and Paul and praise, and it just seemed like it just pulled me out of the scene when I was already in it. The squirrel gripped in a hawk's talon screaming was a really funny image, but then after that it was all
for sure,
thoughts, head. Anything else to say?
No, I would agree. I think it is a bit, and it's not to say that you can't get into a character's head. There's plenty of opportunity for interiority, but there's a difference between like what would be, so this is like a close third person, this is first person, and so we're, you can't get any more into somebody's head than in first person, yet I still want to be in their head in the moment that's happening, as opposed to in the moment and then here's an aside for the reader. Here's an explanation for the reader. And that's where it drifts from like nice interiority into telling.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's a really good explanation of what was pulling me out of things there.
Cool. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Thank you very much for that one.
Thank you.
All right. The secret to surviving in jail is keeping everything inside. Prisoners jeer and gossip and scheme like middle school girls, but middle school girls don't carry shivs. I was sentenced to 6 months and served 4, so I missed the spring semester but expected to return to school in the fall. The days were all the same, and the weeks as indistinct as the days. When I left, my memory compressed the time in jail to the length of a week at summer camp when I was 13. On my last day, I had a fouler than usual breakfast of rubbery eggs and funky sausages and acrid coffee. I was assigned a room I didn't need in a halfway house, strip searched one last time to make sure I wasn't stealing a pair of handcuffs, and ushered to the parking lot. The Department of Corrections owned a handful of green and white buses with inmate transport painted on the side. They looked like retired school buses and stunk of exhaust and oil and poor hygiene. The bus was outfitted with a new steel gate separating the passengers from the driver and rings welded to the floor to attach leg irons. And the green vinyl upholstered benches had been replaced with rigid plastic. Unlike inmates, school children won't try to extract the springs for weapons or lockpicks. When I got on, the back seats had been taken. I sat in the very front and leaned against the wall so I could see backward. Another inmate sat down across from me with a friendly nod. I nodded back. He was big, over 6 feet, maybe 300 pounds, shaved head, scars. I didn't like sitting so close, but he didn't seem hostile. That was the worst breakfast I ever ate. His voice was a deep rumble.
I really like that. That's a great voice. And I love how much you learn about the character based on the metaphors that they choose. Comparing things to middle school, you get like a sense that they have not been out of middle school long, and high school,
or could be in high school. I missed the springs, but definitely is younger.
Yeah, and just the little details that really, you want to know more because they're sprinkled in there nicely, and the voice is interesting, and it's not like it's super complex, but it's well written.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I would also keep reading.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, we've got
you.
some great submissions here. Thank you.
The limo arrives at 9. It pulls up the curb. It waits. The usual New York City traffic honks, shouts, screams. The limo doesn't move. The driver stares through the mirror. His boss will wait between 5 and 7 minutes before getting down. He's not busy reading the paper. He's not making a call. He doesn't need to straighten his tie. William Goldwater waits because he can. He enjoys making people wait. Causing a traffic jam, even a small one, listening to the helplessness of mere mortals is the first of many power trips he enjoys during the day. 6 minutes. Goldwater opens the door. He steps out, doesn't close the door behind him. The porter outside the Astor building opens the door for him. The private elevator only he and Edward Astor may use is there, waiting for him, held open by another porter. The doors close. He punches in his code. Goldwater delights in the ride solitude, the smell.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Okay. Actually, I'm going to put it back on this screen so we can see a little bit. So the reason I stopped there is, well, there's a couple small errors, but there's a POV shift that just didn't quite make sense for me. It didn't work for me, where I immediately lost immersion in this, going through this first page, because I start out thinking I'm in the limo driver's head.
Yeah.
I've got this perspective of the limo driver kind of thinking about his boss, who's a bit of a jerk and very full of himself, and then all of a sudden the kind of camera angle, if you will, is just follows Goldwater out of the cab, and then Goldwater delights in the ride's solitude. At that point, we're in Goldwater's head, whereas we were in the limo driver's head before. So yeah, that kind of POV shift is very jarring. It kind of makes you lose a sense of like what the narrator's doing, who is the narrator, where's this story going. So yeah, unfortunately, that would kill it for me.
For me, I think I got lost when Goldwater was actually in the cab. I believed he was in the building coming down, just because of the use of he waits between 5 and 7 minutes before getting down, which is maybe just a strange like preposition use there.
Instead of getting out.
Yeah. Okay. So I imagined him up in the building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Thank you very much
Thanks.
for that one. All right. The faucet drips. It drizzles. It trickles. There's water but no pressure. Well, no. No pressure on the pipes. No. All the pressure's on us, Abdo thinks. His fingers under the trickle, wets his cracked lips, tastes the water. The usual metallic chlorine flavor on his mouth. His hand over the bristles on his cheeks. He'll shave at night if there's hot water. He fixes his tie. He insists on wearing a tie on his way to work. His son calls him old-fashioned. He calls him many things, none of them good. Most times, his son calls him a fool. Abdo will take off the tie when he gets to work, of course. Bakers don't wear ties. His glasses are in the glass jar on the shelf by the door. Nura used to leave them there for him, lest he forgot them. Nura is gone. Her memory haunts him every day. When the muezzin call the faithful to prayer, when he stretches his mat on the floor, when he kneels down, faces Mecca, bows, prays to Allah for her soul. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. There is no God. Muhammad was full of shit. All right. What do you think?
I love it. It hints at a lot of characterization. Really quickly you get to know about Abdo, especially through his son.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, again, that one makes the long list for me.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of economy here. A lot is accomplished in a short space with a short few amount of words.
And great rhythm to the sentences. It's doing something.
Yeah, it pulls me right in, conjures an image. There's really good immersion here. Okay, good. Thank you very much for that one.
They had one day, at most two, before the whole place would be washed away in a monsoon. But it was fear of discovery that drove the movers, and made them scan the skies as they worked. The trucks came and went, pouring out diesel fumes and kicking up dust in the empty yard. The dust wafted through the open warehouse doors, joining its interior aspect which swirled down from the rafters and off the crates of guns and treasure. There was no time to stop loading, but Laurent Thoreau pulled the dust mask off his face and wiped at the grimy circle it had made around his mouth and nose. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and he paused, trying to guess if the sky was being serious or not. No, not yet. They still had time. The sun was setting, but there were a couple of hours yet. He hated wearing the mask, but it was essential in this warehouse. The dust from inside and out made a solid cube in the orange light. It swirled in the wind, smelling of rotting trash and hot stones. The place was tucked between a brickmaker's and the fruit market. The dust and flies were everywhere. Luckily, Thoreau and his men wouldn't be here much longer. And the warehouse had been a perfect hiding place, dirty, out of the way, and unremarkable. He looked at the bales of silk, carefully wrapped in plastic sheeting.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Okay, so first of all, the first three paragraphs are actually really nice. I like the wording. The prose is nice. It's atmospheric. I started to snag a little bit on he hated wearing the mask, but it was essential in this warehouse. I mean, it's a very small issue of show versus tell, but I do always snag on when the narrator tells me how a character's feeling. That's one thing I always want to see shown rather than told. Be told that somebody's upset about something, that somebody hates something. It would be very easy to just show somebody like fidgeting with the mask or something like that.
It's an opportunity to characterize them as well.
Yeah.
Give you something more about how they show their hatred.
But what I actually snagged on more than that was in the next paragraph, and this is another small issue, but when you're going through a slush pile like this could be the deciding factor. And it's he looked at the last bales of silk. And this is just something, so editors see the word look so much in early draft manuscripts. Characters are always looking at everything. They're always turning their head, gazing, and it's a way that the author has, I guess, of directing the camera angle, so to speak, within the narrative. But when you're in a close or limited third-person perspective, and same if you're in a first-person's perspective, anything described is necessarily what the character sees, hears, feels. So you never need to say what they look at. It's implicit in the point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how about you?
That's all I have to say. I echo that.
Okay. Cool. All right, let's go on to the next one. Thanks for that.
He was sold for the price of a pig, was the kind of introduction to the story of his life people like to hear. That particular line, among the other more spiced up or entirely made up ones, happened to be quite accurate. 500 silas were the actual sum. Back then it had been considered outrageously high for a 10-year-old boy. In the world of slave auction, the starting price for a child that young was just 50, given that they weren't being offered for free as a bundle deal with the mother. Young boys and girls needed more time to train. They also made mistakes, lacked the strength needed for most jobs, and could die young. Not a great investment. Unless, one, were out of options. Some children were, however, the most profitable assets for the pleasure district of Rosharwe. Men could be expected to pay a good fee to break the innocence, and comely children could be sold above market price for that purpose. In the business of pleasure, it was also considered wise to train them young. Children had less resistance, could be taught and shaped into whatever was needed, made to believe it was what their lives were meant to be. By the hands of fate, or whichever god who had sought to curse him out of boredom, Hashim hadn't been born comely. Not just anyway.
Okay. So I didn't stop you. We got to the end. So there's a couple things I wanted to say. First of all, I really did like this opening. He's sold for the price of a pig was the kind of introduction to the story of his life people like to hear. That's a good opening. That's a good first line. But I started to lose immersion as we went down the page, because this is... So first of all, this is a prologue. You can see at the top there. And there's nothing wrong with a prologue. There's a lot of great prologues out there, but a lot of editors and agents will be pretty wary when they see that there's a prologue, because there are so many bad prologues. And what makes a prologue bad is, I mean, it's completely subjective. That's really harsh to say that it's bad, and I'm not saying that this is bad, but this has some features of okay, so it's setup. It's setup. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah. I'm just not putting my words together very well. It's not like dropping us. Like sometimes a prologue will drop you into a dynamic scene in the past that establishes something about the character. But when the prologue's being used to set up or explain or, just like establish backstory, it's kind of not doing what it needs to be doing, and I'm not like engaging with it at the level that I need to be to keep reading at this point, for this Slushpile submission. What do you think?
I would agree, and I also really liked the first two sentences. Spiced up or entirely made up.
So yeah, I'd say there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
And depending on the context that I was looking at this, I would want to keep reading. I would want to see what's going on next, because I feel like I'm in the hands of an accomplished writer here. But this as a prologue isn't completely firing with me.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah?
full agreement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that one. Fine white powder, like snow dust, winds in and eddies about, microscopic dunes trailing on the tight clapboard flooring stained grey. Time-opened grooves fill with silt. It is cold. The air is grey like the floor, a near-invisible satin sheen superimposing the space that fills the lungs when breathed, fills the nasal passages with a fiery edge that bites and burns. This is the white winter. But there's red here too, under floorboards and inside houses, and under muscles and bone and skin. There's murder here, and murder in this town only means one thing. Someone is coming. Eyes narrowed, teeth clamped, and the sudden flinch betrayed years of confidence in the job, the sights that come with the position. But it wasn't the job this time that did it. It was the man lying on the floor before him, head cocked out at a weird, obtuse disconnect from his shoulders, thrown back and twisted right, the left shoulder buried halfway into the pie tin behind him. Sheriff Randall Dawkins, 55 and caught for 30, hadn't seen a murder in almost 4 years. In that time, he'd only had to make 12 arrests, and those had been for drunken disorderlies, a few assaults, 1 theft, and a hit and run from an out-of-towner. Besides that, Morse was a small town, the smallest kind of town, with very little for an enterprising criminal to hang his hat on, much less commit with abandon. The very nature of the place lent itself to a communal peacefulness. Randall had seen his share of deaths in Morse. Hell, one of the biggest tracts of land aside from the rolling wheat farmlands was the cemetery, but most of the residents had lived in Morse all their lives, and in the end died fairly peacefully in their beds. He'd even seen his share of tragedy, like when Mike Williams's boy had decided to drive 90 miles per hour through town on the left side of the road, blindfolded. So young, so full of promise, and dumb enough to think he was immortal. Randall looked at the dead man's face and wondered. All right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I really like it.
The images are just incredible in there, and it's so poetic. And it's a mystery, I think, which I love. Well, that's just a preference.
Yeah, I love a mystery as well. And the one thing that stands out with this is definitely the language.
Yeah, it's just pretty. It's a pretty mystery, which is cool. That for me definitely makes the long list.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I especially like that first paragraph.
Yeah,
it's really
beautiful.
nice opening.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Really, really pulled me in.
All right, so
Thank
that one
you.
is doing the job. Thank you for submitting. All right, well, that was fun.
Yeah, totally. That's all we have today. But thank you for checking out the video. And also thank you to everybody who submitted first pages. It was really kind of you to share those with us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We do hope to do this again, so if you'd like to participate, please send us an email at editors@darlingaxe.com. Also visit our website if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter. And I'm going to add an article to the video description, so check out the video description if you'd like to read a little bit more about showing versus telling. We've got a great article by Michelle Barker, who is another editor for Darling Axe Editing. So thank you very much, and see you next time.
See you.